hello. Sound good? We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Mimi Chudler. I'm the Director of College Counseling here at VES. I just want to thank you all for being here this weekend and especially for being right here in Garmy Theater with us this afternoon. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to introduce Mr. Steve Farmer to you. Steve Farmer has had a wide variety of roles and experiences in the world of college admissions, and he currently serves as the University of Virginia's first Vice Provost for Enrollment. And in this role, he oversees not only undergraduate admissions, but also student financial services, the University Registrar, and Virginia's College Advising Corps. So that's a really big job. UVA shared the following details about Mr. Farmer's career in their bio for him. Mr. Farmer previously served as Vice Provost for Enrollment and Undergraduate Admissions at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and during his tenure there, he established new records for the academic excellence and socioeconomic, geographic, and racial and ethnic diversity of its entering undergraduate classes, as well as record numbers of first-year applications for 14 consecutive years. Born and raised in rural Rustburg, Virginia, right down the road, Mr. Farmer earned a master's degree in English from UVA and previously served as assistant and senior assistant dean of admission at the university, so his current role is a homecoming. He also earned a bachelor's degree in English from Duke University, where he was an A.B. Duke Scholar, which is an honor of similar caliber to Moorhead or Jefferson scholars. We are very fortunate that Mr. Farmer serves on VES's Board of Trustees, where his depth of experience, thoughtful and balanced feedback, foresight, and sincere kindness help to elevate that team's work and helps our leadership team to make wise decisions for VES's future. Steve, thank you so much for scooting out of your own admissions event in Charlottesville to make the drive down Route 29 to join us this afternoon.
Mimi, thanks so much for being so good to me. I'm going to thank you again in a minute, but thank you for what you just said and the way you said it. And you know, I've been around, I've seen you around for years, and you mentioned my kindness, and I don't think that's right. But I know it's right to talk about yours. I appreciate your generosity, not just to me, but also, not just to your colleagues, but to all the young people here. And Amy, yours too. A gift to students here. And one that I trust they appreciate. They may not always appreciate exactly what you tell them, but I think they, in time, if not today, will appreciate that you told them, and that you told them what you told them out of love for them. And I appreciate your care for me, too. I really am grateful to you all. I mean, I feel very lucky to be here. It is always great to be at VES. I don't have to tell you all this. This is a wonderful place. It's a place that really does care for students, and a place that really encourages them to care for one another. I've been at a lot of schools, and I can't count how many. And that's not just because I'm old and forgetful, it's because I've been on a lot of different campuses over the years, and 30 years in admission. But one of the things that I have really come to appreciate about this place is that this place has a sense of community unlike any I've seen anywhere. This place, VES, I don't know what it does, but the students here really seem to love not only VES, but to love one another. And I just don't think that's an easy thing for any school to accomplish. It certainly says something for the way that you raised your sons and daughters, that they've been willing to come here and find common cause with people from all over the world. But it also says something good and true about this place. And I've learned a lot about Bishop Jett since I joined the board here a few years ago. And Bishop Jett, as you all know, envisioned a place that would guide students toward full stature, a place that would draw out of them all that's noblest and finest. And the noblest and finest in your children, as in all of us, is love. The greatest of your children is their love. And I'm really grateful to be in a place that encourages students to love their classmates as themselves, to look out not only for their own futures and their own well-being, but the futures and the well-being of all those around them. And that is what I know of VES. You know, and as I've said, I've already thanked Mimi, I've already thanked Amy, but I wouldn't be here without them. You know, the great people who counsel and support your students towards full stature, and also towards colleges that'll be worthy of your children's great and good gifts. Thank you for giving me the chance to be here. It is really hard for me to imagine a wiser or a kinder or better-natured bunch of counselors and staff than your children have here at VES. You know, my wife Susan and I have 2 children. They're grown. They're beyond searching for college. And they've been pretty lucky in life so far, except for the short straw they drew in their dad. They were really, really lucky in their own high school counselor, a really great man named Montez Thomas at Chapel Hill High School in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And they were also lucky in their path to college, which Montez really graciously helped them walk. And as lucky as our children were, and as good a result as they got out of the walk-in with Montez, I know our children would have thrived under the care of the remarkable counselors here at VES. And so I regret that they did not have time to spend time with you all. While I'm on the subject of my children, excuse me, not my children, our children, because I had very little to do with it. My wife is the one who bore them and has raised them largely. When I started my line of work 30 years ago, it's been a long time, I felt totally comfortable standing up in front of a group of parents and giving them all kinds of advice about how they should behave as their children grew up and as their children started to search for colleges. And then our first son was born in 1997, and I panicked because I realized that everything I had ever said and everything I ever would say would always come back to haunt me. And it has. You know, the good news is, for me, now that I am old, and now that our children are grown, you know, and honestly, now that I've had time to reflect on all the terrible mistakes I made as a parent and all the pointless suffering I caused our 2 children, I don't worry too much about the advice that I give, because my advice now is based on my mistakes. What I really probably should do is, of course, sit down and be quiet and just throw myself on the mercy of the court in repentance for my mistakes, for my errors. But because that would make for a very short talk this afternoon, I will talk for a little while longer. 10 days ago, I had lunch with one of my very favorite current students, actually one of my all-time favorite students. Haven't known him that long, as I'll say, but one of my all-time favorite college students. He's a second-year young man at UVA, a Virginian, who I think is having just about the very best college experience a person could possibly have. And that's saying something, because I've known a lot of great college students who've had a lot of great experiences, but this young man is having a great time. He's studying 2 subjects, history and Spanish, that he loves. He's made good friends with people from all over. He is playing in 2 bands and writing a lot of his own music, which one of his bands is actually performing. And judging from what he told me 10 days ago when I had lunch with him about his plans for the summer, he is on track for a first job that will challenge him and will keep him off his parents' payroll. And that's usually where parents applaud, by the way. But you know, for lack of a better word, this young man just seems to be, I mean, he just seems happy. He's happy. I met this student in January of 2021, not long after I'd started working again at UVA, right around the time that this young man had received the news that we were not going to be able to offer him a place in our first-year class. UVA had been this student's first choice. And in fact, it had kind of been his only choice. And so the news that we had just given him was very, very hard for him to bear. But when I talked with him that January, he was doing his very, very best to bear it as well as anybody possibly could. And when I talked with him, he told me that he was disappointed, But he told me he was sure he was going to find another school. And he told me he was going to go to that school and give it all he had. And he told me he would give that school the chance to win his heart. But then he said that, you know, if he decided to apply again to UVA, he would do his best and he would hope for a better result. So that was January of 2021. Last year about this time, a year after I met him, I called this boy at 5:30 in the afternoon one Friday to tell him that the good result he had hoped for the year before had come true and was now waiting for him. I called him to offer him admission as a transfer student to the University of Virginia. Now, of course, I didn't get to talk to him then because he was a first-year college student. He was playing an intercollegiate sport. He had much too much going on to talk to some old, sad stranger he'd talked to the year before. But he did call me back about an hour later. And when he called me back, he didn't call back to say that we've been wrong when we declined his application the year before. He didn't call to ask why it took us so long to come to our senses. You know, he didn't call, in other words, just to spike the football on me. Instead, he called to say thank you. He said he'd had a wonderful year at the school that he'd chosen. He'd made friends. He'd keep his whole life long. He said he'd gotten to play a sport, which is something he never would have been able to do at the University of Virginia. He said he'd had a great time. And he also said that he was ready to do something else. And he was actually going to enroll in Charlottesville. And the last thing he said when I talked to him that day on the phone was, I hope to see you next fall. So 1 year and 4 or 5 or 6, I can't remember, lunches later, I am still really glad that this young man called me back that day. And honestly, I'm still in awe of the way he handled his roundabout journey to his second and his final good school. I'm in awe at the way he handled the path, that he walked the path before him with wisdom and courage and grace. And yes, as he said to me, with hope. Now, to be clear, I don't just mean the hope that this student expressed when he and I talked last April after he'd gotten in, the hope that he and I would see each other again and that he would drop by when he came to Charlottesville in the fall. I mean the hope that he willed himself to feel when life to him might have otherwise felt a little hopeless. The hope he willed himself to feel when he got the news he didn't want to hear. The hope that he would find a good school. Not his first choice, but a second first choice. The hope that he'd find the strength to give that good school the very best he had. The hope that that school would win his heart. And finally, the hope that if he went about his work and his life the right way, he'd get a good result 1 year later, or at least a result he could make good by responding to it with wisdom and courage and grace, and once again, with hope. Now, of course, the guy I've been talking about wouldn't have been wrong at all to ask me why in the world it took us so long to come to our senses. Why didn't we admit him the year before? What took us so long? What did we miss? Well, the hard truth of my line of work is that we know far less about students than we'd like to know, and we know far less than we think we know, and we know far less than we'd like to admit we know. When parents, and you may ask me a question later on, and I will do my best to answer it, the fact of the matter is there are some things that I don't know and I can't know. And when students, parents, counselors, reporters ask us how we choose among the great candidates who honor us by applying for admission each year, we give answers. We sound as though we know what we're doing. We respond with big phrases that make us sound as though we really know what we're talking about. We might talk about reviewing each candidate comprehensively and holistically. We might talk about putting together a well-rounded class. You know, we will talk a good game, and there is some truth to what we're saying. But the larger truth is that we are forever seeing through a glass darkly. And it can't be anything other than that. 29 years ago, again, almost to this day, there was a really remarkable student, a great, good-hearted student who was parked on the waiting list for admission to her first choice school. And when someone called to offer this student the last place, the very last place in the entering class, this student dropped the telephone and then she started screaming. And then everyone in her small and very, very crowded apartment, a little apartment in Florida, everyone in the apartment, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, siblings, second cousins twice removed, everybody in that little apartment started screaming with her. And I know this for a fact because I was the lucky person who called that student that day, and I will never forget the call. I'll never forget it partly because of the joy that I was privileged to witness that afternoon. And I'll never forget it because of what came after, because 4 years later, this student, the last soul we admitted that year, was named the most outstanding senior in her graduating class. So in front of thousands of cheering witnesses, including the same people who had screamed with her the day she'd been admitted, this very last student became the very first. And I think of her all the time, especially at this time of year when people in my line of work finally have time to reflect on the decisions we've made over the course of a long season. We strive to see the best in our candidates. We want the best for them. We love them. But no matter how hard we try, and we do try hard, no matter how hard we try, we know we can never fully know what any student will do and become, how any student will change and grow over the course of the next 4 years, much less the student's whole life long. And because we know that we can't know, we can't help wondering about the people we've missed. And we hope that they bear whatever news we have to give them with wisdom and courage and grace and hope, knowing that there is more to them than we will ever know. You know, when people ask me, and sometimes they do, when people ask me who we're seeking at the University of Virginia, I usually tell them we're looking for talented students from all walks of life. Great students who will make each other better. Great students who will see the best in one another. Great students who will want the best for one another. I tell them we're looking for students who want to be, in the words of our statement on free expression, the kind of empathetic speakers and generous listeners who will seek the truth together as responsible members of a shared community. I tell them we're looking for students who are willing to give their best in all that they do every day. And all of this sounds good, and it's all true. It's easy, though, to name these qualities. It's easy to name what we seek, and much, much harder to know when we found it. It is especially hard to gauge these attributes with precision, especially in 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, who are growing and changing every day. And so I think it's important that people in my line of work be honest with you and with your sons and daughters about exactly this, that we admit the limits of our vision. It is important that we tell your sons and daughters over and over again that we know there is more to them than we will ever know. And that is, of course, true for your children. It is, of course, true for them. There is more to them than any admission officer will ever know. There is more to them than we will ever know. We will do our best to know them, I promise you. And your children can help us get to know them a little better by resisting the urge to package themselves up so neatly in their applications, or to let someone else package them up so neatly in their applications that the real person beneath the package is lost to us. You know, it is hard enough to see a real person. It is almost impossible to see the real person through the package. And no matter how impressive the pretty package is, it will never be as impressive as the real person who lies beneath. And so your children can help us by being the real and wonderful people they are and having confidence in the real and wonderful people they are. But there's another reason, besides just their helping themselves, helping me see them more clearly. There's another more important reason why I really, really hope your students will have the courage to be themselves and have confidence in themselves when they apply. Whoops. Did I lose? Can you still hear me? Okay. Look, there's another more important reason why I hope your kids will be themselves when they apply for admission. The more important reason is that there is nothing that any college has that is worth any student's sacrificing herself, her true self, for our sake. No one of us schools, no one of us is worth that kind of sacrifice. There are too many fine schools who would love to have talented young men and women who are still dying to have your sons and daughters join them. There are too many places where a student can be happy and get ready to come off their parents' payroll. There are too many places like that for any student to sacrifice herself for any of us. And besides, and I want to emphasize this too, as Frank Bruni has said, where students go is not what they are. And it is especially not what they will be. Where students go isn't what they are. And it's especially not what they will be. I think your students who have had the chance to work with Mimi and Amy, I think your students already know this. I think they know this deep down in their hearts. I think they know this already. But at some point between now and April of their senior year at VES, when they are wondering what's going to happen to them, to themselves, they're waiting for answers from people like me. In a vulnerable moment, they may come to doubt. They may doubt that where they go isn't really what they are or what they will be. They may instead feel that not getting into their first choice school is a bit like getting cast into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. But we all know that's not true. We all know that's not where they're going. They're going to a good place. They're going into the rest of their lives. And as they search around for their next home after VES, I really hope we'll take every chance to remind them of what they already know. Where they go is not what they are and never what they will be. And listen, if you'll forgive me for being a parent here at the end, and if you'll forgive me for offering the heartfelt but probably misplaced advice that I'm about to offer you, again, based on my own experience and my own grievous mistakes, you know, just as there's more to our children than any admission officer will ever know, there is more to them than we will ever know. We think we know our children, and we do, but we don't. We think we know what's best for them, and we do, but we don't. We think we know the path that's right for them, and we think we have the power to choose that path for them and to keep them on that path, never straying to the left or to the right. But what we really have is the privilege, the sacred privilege of loving them as they find and then walk their own paths. We have the privilege of helping them trust their wisdom, of helping them find their courage, of helping them bear their burdens, their disappointment, their suffering with grace. We have the privilege of helping them live in hope, even when they may feel hopeless. That's what I know of parenting. You're surely a better parent than I was or ever will be. You will not make the mistakes that I have made and am continuing to make. But of all the things that I've shared so far today, whether you can hear me or not, of all the things that I've shared, I hope the thing that you'll remember the most is how deserving your children are of love, how much other people love them, how dearly we want to walk alongside them too as they find their path and walk it, and how we'll do everything we can to help them do what you've been helping them do from the time they were born, which is to figure out who they are and to figure out where they're going and to help them make the most of the one life that they have. Thank you for listening to me. I'm happy to take questions. The usual response when I talk to people is that they're done with me and they don't want to ask any questions because they don't want to hear me talking anymore. I will completely understand if that's the case, and I will not be offended. And I should say too, listen, if anything that I said, well, no, that's not the right way to put this. I said some things that were presumptuous. I talked as though I knew some things that I probably don't. I hope you'll forgive me for all of that. And I hope you'll give me a second chance, either by asking a question or by catching me after the hour, so that I can try to undo whatever damage I just did. With that, I will take questions, and the microphone is miraculously back on. So. Anyone? Yes, I'm sorry, ma'am. I think you had your hand up first. Well, I really appreciate that, and I bet you wouldn't have. And well, no, you know, and that's the other thing too about it. I don't know. I feel so blessed in my life because our children are very forgiving of me. You know, they have an incredible mother, and so there's nothing to forgive there. But you know, there have been times. You know, they're in their 20s now. Our son is an Army officer. Our daughter's in law school. And they've had their struggles in life. They've had their bumps and bruises. And some of them are ones that I caused them, honestly. And, you know, they'll talk with me about it. They'll say, you know, hey, Dad, you know, I never understood why you were doing this. And I still don't understand why you were doing it, but I forgive you for it. You know, that's pretty good. That's about as good as I feel like I can hope for. And it's far better than I deserve. And, you know, if we make mistakes in parenting our kids, I hope we all live to tell them and laugh about it. And, you know, I hope our kids will forgive us. Anybody else? Yes, sir. I think you had a question.
Right. The first one is based on your affiliation with VES and some of the mistakes you made to make up for you just rubber stamp application for VES.
You know, it's a great question. No, I understand. Well, you know, it's funny. When I was worried when I decided to go on the board here. I was working at UNC at the time, and I always had a high regard for VES. Actually, I went to Russburg High School, as Mimi mentioned, and we used to scrimmage the VES baseball team out here. Rock Lee was the coach of VES, and so I had a lot of really positive feelings about VES. And there was a great man at Chapel Hill named Paul Fulton, who asked me a couple of times if I would ever think about being on the board here. And I hope he had talked with the people here about that. But and you know, the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to do it. But I felt like I had to talk to my boss and say, like, I feel like this might be a conflict because I'm an admission person at the time, and you know, I want to go on the board of this school. And he said, well, I think you probably can handle it. And he said, you know, if you're worried about it, just recuse yourself from the decisions that are made about students at the school, and that's the way I've handled it. So not only am I not rubber stamping applications, I'm not reading applications from VNS. It's not because I don't want to, but it's because I think that would put everybody in a bad spot.
I made a comment earlier about, different people, I can't remember exactly the term, because you ended that whole phase by saying trying to get a well-rounded class. How does that go into the decision-making process? You guys look at, you got these students over here, we don't really have a lot of redhead kids, or so let's take this redhead kid, you know, we got all these kids over here, we're bald kids.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. I'm all for the bald kids. Not from the bald kids, no. I'm shameless about them. No, it's a great question. It's about, how do you put together a class? I think, honestly, it varies a lot depending on the school. So I've worked at two really wonderful public universities that are operating at scale. We have at UVA this year, we'll have 3,970 first-year students. Unless we're off and are over by a few hundred, in which case I will be greeting you as a private citizen next year and not as an employee of the University of Virginia, because the people in housing will have run me out of town. When you're kind of working at scale, you can sort of trust that in the thousands, you'll have a lot of different points of view, you'll have a lot of different perspectives, you'll have just a lot of things sort of coming together. And we do. At the same time, I think when the members of the admission committee are reading applications and there's a young person who has a background, they're not familiar with it, and it really seems integral to the student rather than just something that's packaged on top of the student. All other things being equal, I can see they're leaning towards a student like that, because they're trying to bring a person into the mix who might open the eyes of the person's first-year roommate, or the person in class who the student's going to get into an argument with at some point. I think it operates differently at smaller schools that can do more picking by ones and twos. And again, even at a school that's operating at scale, there are times when something that's so striking and distinctive about a person's background or about a person's gift can be the thing, in addition to other things, that helps the person get over the finish line. Other questions? I will promise to be briefer in my next answer. Yes?
We move away from the ACT and SAT, maybe trying to get to the inner child more. Is that the case? Or how do you see the standardized test now versus 30 years ago?
Great question about standardized testing. What is the move away from standardized testing done? And it's a great and complicated question. The move away from standardized testing has been a long time coming. I think the first school that went test optional in the late 60s or early 70s. So there's been a gradual, I think, better understanding of what standardized testing can and cannot predict. And I think the reservations about what testing cannot predict have made schools feel more comfortable in moving away from testing as some kind of threshold criterion that they have to apply to every student uniformly. The great value, are there any psychometricians in the room? Because I should call on you to give the answer to this question. So if you design standardized testing for a living, and the standardized testing is being administered to 1 million students a year, what you learn is that standardized testing is really good at predicting the behavior of large numbers. Like, it's a large number issue. So if you have a class of students where the average SAT is 1,400, generally speaking, they'll perform better in school than a class with 4,000 people who have an average score of 1,000, because the predictive power of the test really gets amplified in big numbers rather than in small numbers. A test score won't predict what any individual student is going to do. That's not what it was designed to do. It was designed to be one little marker that helps schools manage big numbers of people, rather than evaluate with precision what any individual person is capable of doing, much less will do. And so that's another realization. I think schools have gotten more comfortable with that. It's made it easier for us to say either, you know what, the SAT or the ACT, they're not going to be the be-all and end-all of our process anymore. Or, following COVID, gosh, it was so hard for students to sit for either one of those tests. Let's try for a while what it's like not requiring those tests, giving students the freedom to submit them if they want, but not requiring that they do. You know, for us, honestly, we're still piloting this. We feel like UVA, we feel like we really need to get a whole class of students having moved through the university. We don't want to base a permanent decision on a one-year performance of one class that enrolled without test scores. We feel like we need to see people all the way through beforehand, so we're still in the pilot phase. But the early results, there's no difference in retention at UVA between people who presented test scores and people didn't. There's no difference right now in their average GPAs between people who presented test scores and people who didn't. And, you know, that's just information we need to feed into the hopper as we're trying to figure out what we're going to do eventually. I will say, and this is just to put in a plug for testing, I think it's important that students test. You know, even if they never give their test to us, I think it's important that students test themselves. And there's some really good research coming out of the pandemic that, I mean, nationwide research that's looked at more or less every child who's gone away to college. Students who took tests, even if they didn't report their scores to their schools, did better in college than students who didn't take tests in the first place. And that's a big correlation. It's not necessarily causation, but, you know, if you think about it, testing helps the student take stock of her strengths or his weaknesses, if you'd rather. It can give teachers at a school some information about where a student is so that they can focus on some things that might be helpful to the student. There are really good reasons for taking tests, whether or not students ever report them to the likes of me. Other questions? I said I was going to be briefer and I wasn't, so I'm not going to say that again. Yes, sir. It's a great question. Did everyone hear the question? So there are a lot of candidates for applying. The gate is narrow. And how in the world does the school, well, how in the world does my school do it? And, you know, honestly, as I've already said, I think, and this is not really a satisfactory answer, but we do it with fear and trembling, first of all. Because, again, we know that the tools that we're using are limited. They'd be limited no matter how much we put into making them less limited. You know, let's say we were going to interview the 55,000 candidates who applied for admission, and we were going to offer every student 15 minutes of an interview. We would learn something about a student in 15 minutes of an interview. I don't know that we would learn enough. In fact, I'm quite sure we wouldn't learn enough. And so the tools that we have are limited. Students do the best they can to use the tools in a way that I hope, as I've said, is authentic to them. And they have a chance to give us at least a bit of a shot into what they've done in school, how they've gone about their work in school, what they've done outside school. And the schools themselves tell us a lot about how students have done. Having said all that, you know, at UVA, and these are the statistics, and you've already seen them, out-of-state students last year were admitted at a rate of about 15%. This year, it'll probably be 12 to 15% again. So, you know, not quite 1 in 10, but almost. One way to think about a school like UVA, two things. One is that UVA is not the only school in the world. Second of all, you know, students do the best they can. They put themselves in a good position. And then they have to hope, because there's I want to be really careful how I say this, there's a bit of a lottery quality to it. You know, schools will do the very best they can. We do the best we can. The admission committee, they read applications over and over again. They stew and they debate about, you know, whom to say yes to, whom to ask for more information from, whom to ask to wait for a little while longer. And despite all the work in it, and despite all the hard effort, they know that for every student we know for every student we offer admission to, we have 2 or 3 or 4 others who are really, really well credentialed like them. And then we have more students than that who are perfectly capable of thriving at UVA. So all that is an unsatisfactory answer. Simple to say, I think it's important for students to, this is me talking, I think it's really important for students to approach their applications not from the point of view of what's going to give me the best chance of getting into X school, because it's hard for students to know that, and because even if they do their very best, the odds are still against them. Rather than approach applying that way, I would approach applying from the point of view of, okay, what do I want to be assessed on? Like, what do I want to reveal about myself? What truth about myself can I tell, knowing that in the end, the decision is going to be made based on some truth, even if it's only imperfectly viewed, than something that I made up to try to get the result that I want. And I really think if students approach the process of applying with an eye towards trying to be as true to themselves as they can, first of all, they'll get the best result they could get. And second of all, they'll be better able to live with the result, whatever the result might be, if they've gone about it that way. That is a really unsatisfactory answer for young people who are applying for admission. It's an honest one, though. And the other thing students can do to help themselves, and I've seen this again and again, is to not get fixed quite so quickly on a really small group of students, schools, all of which are really, really hard to get into. You know, top students at schools like VES have a lot of great luck. Other students at VES who aren't top have a lot of great luck too. I mean, seriously, students from VES go to great schools, but they go to a really wide range of great schools, not just 5 great schools. And that's the way I hope more students think about it. I was talking with a young woman at the Days on the Lawn program at UVA this morning. Great young woman, got so much going for her. She's deciding between UVA, she's a Virginian, she's deciding between UVA and some other school that you've never heard of, that she really likes, because she thinks it's going to be a good place for her. And that's a place that has won her heart. If she had limited her search to schools like UVA, she never would have found the place that may well end up beating out UVA for her loyalty. And so I think kind of casting a little bit of wider net than students feel that they maybe should or need to, I think can help take the edge off of some of the worry too. Other questions? Yes, sir. Actually, you just said how it works. We have a lot of people reading applications. They read them one by one. They cross them. You know, they share them with one another. There are small committees that meet together over the course of the year to talk about the candidates they're seeing. In some parts of the Commonwealth, we have a senior reader who's responsible for a region, who knows the schools really well and can offer advice to more junior people or people who have less experience, peek over their shoulder, make sure that they're making the right decisions, or at least defensible decisions. But it really is, you know, for better and for worse, it's really a human process that involves 35 or 40 people at different times of the year sitting in front of a computer screen already all day, reading one application after another, sharing them with a neighbor, asking the neighbor what the neighbor thinks, and then trying to figure out what to do. And then at the end of it all, and this is the other part of it, this is really inside baseball, at the end of it all, right before decisions go out, people go back and review their work. Like, the admission office goes back and reviews the provisional decisions that it made to make sure that they've been that they've seen as clearly and they've treated people as fairly as they can. So there's a 2 or 3, in some cases, a 4-week process at the very end where people are going back and doing over again what they did at the beginning of the year to make sure that before decisions are released to young people, they're decisions that we've made thoughtfully. Again, not perfectly, not with perfectly clear vision, but thoughtfully and with care and with love for the people whose lives we know in a way are in our hands. Other questions? Yes, sir. It's a great question, and did everyone hear the question? You know, how do we compare students in different schools? That's also a challenge, honestly. I think that the starting point for people who read applications for a living is that just as no two students are exactly the same, no two schools are exactly the same. And you can't understand the student unless you understand the school. So no good reader of applications, no good evaluator of young people approaches every student in the same way that the person approaches every other, from school to school to school, because we know that context matters. We know that where students do their work matters a lot. It matters what grades they earn. It matters what GPAs they have. It matters how they write. It matters what opportunities they've had. So we try to do it school to school across a whole population of people with thousands of schools. And if that sounds a little bit like three-dimensional chess, or at least three-dimensional checkers, then it is kind of that. So we're looking at students on intersecting dimensions and trying to figure out what sense we can make of them. I will say, though, and I'm sorry, sir, I'll get to your question. I do get the question a fair amount from people where the academic program is really rigorous and students are held to pretty high standards. Well, isn't my child being disadvantaged by going to a school where the grading is hard, or where people aren't just getting all A's? And, you know, I get a version of that question pretty much everywhere I go. And I don't really think so. You know, and I think, I don't think so because I think people like me evaluate students in the context of their schools, and we know some things about schools, and schools do a really good job of telling us about themselves because it's in their interest and their kids' interest to do it. But I also think that high standards are good for young people. You know, a person who comes out of VES knows how to do a lot of things that a person who goes to a school where the grading is always and forever easy might not know how to do. And that's an advantage to a young person rather than a disadvantage, I would say, both in admission and just over the course of a long life. Yes, sir. I have not spoken with the students recently, but I'm guessing the next thing you're going to say is, please don't. Please stay away from them. I love the students here. I have to tell you that the real pleasure in being a member of the board, and this is no offense to fellow board members and no offense to the great leadership and faculty of this school, but the great pleasure of being able to hang around VES is to get to know some of your sons and daughters. And, you know, I've had lunch here with these young people when they've been working through things. They've been unfailingly good-humored, gracious, generous. And I don't think they've been handpicked because, you know, you just sort of wander into the dining hall and you sit down at a table of young people, and once they stop blinking at you, actually the blink suggests that they have not been prepared for my arrival. Who is the strange creature who has landed in my midst? They're great. So I love the students here. Yes, sir. What are my thoughts on early decision? That's a great question. I'm not a huge fan of early decision, honestly. I think that, so for those of you who haven't suffered the misfortune yet of having to pay attention to stuff like this, schools have made applying to college trickier than it should be. And, you know, instead of having a deadline, there are several. At UVA and at my old school, the reason why we had two different deadlines is because we needed to have a way to space our work out over the course of the whole year. So if everybody applied in January, we wouldn't be able to give people answers on their applications until they were halfway through their first year of college, which would be too late, I'm pretty sure. So spacing out the work is a reason for having multiple deadlines. The question about early decision is a little more complicated because when students apply early decision to a school like UVA, they make a commitment that they'll enroll if they're admitted. I think the way that we practice early decision at UVA is actually really pretty ethical. We don't give students a premium for applying early decision, at least we try not to. There are plenty of schools that do, and Amy and Mimi know all about them, and I don't. What I don't like, or what gives me pause about early decision, is it just feels a little coercive on our part. you know, that we're maybe encouraging a child to make a decision before she's ready to make it. And personally, I would rather give students a lot of time, as much time as they want, within reason in their senior year to make up their mind rather than force a choice early on. I think a lot of young people feel that they have to make a choice to apply early decision someplace because they believe or they've heard that that's the only way they're going to have a chance of getting in. I think that's our fault, and I apologize for it. Raises the question of why we have it at UVA. Again, I think the way we practice early decision at UVA is ethical and responsible, and I'm not ashamed of it. I think we introduced early decision a few years ago before I got there because we knew there were some students who, as I've just said, were determined to apply early decision somewhere because they wanted to get the decision over with or because they thought it was going to help their chances of getting in. And we felt that we were losing a lot of students who were applying to other schools where they were applying early decision because they felt they had to. And so we just didn't want to lose those students. We weren't trying to trick them into enrolling at UVA. We just didn't want to lose them because we didn't offer an option that they felt they wanted someplace else. But again, I have some reservations about it, which I probably should admit it, especially if this is being live streamed and it's going to my boss. But it's something we will be taking a look at. And I have a great boss, by the way, in case he is watching the live stream. Other questions? Y'all are so nice to me. I mean, see, you're just like your kids. Like, guy parachutes in, says a bunch of stupid stuff. You're laughing or you're making eye contact. I really appreciate it, and I'm not making that up. Are there other questions? Yes, sir. That's a really great question. ChatGPT. Has anybody ever heard of ChatGPT? Yes. We have a task force at UVA that's looking into the implications of ChatGPT for instruction. And, you know, the interesting thing about ChatGPT is if schools like UVA adapt effectively to ChatGPT, there's a good chance that it'll help instruction rather than hurt it. There's a good chance that it will help students learn more and do a better job rather than just permit them to ask a question and let a big machine tell them what the answer is in a format that we can't distinguish from their own voice. But that's about instruction, and application essays are a different thing. I don't know what we're going to do, just to be honest with you about it. I think we have an honor system at the University of Virginia that we take very seriously. Some of you may have seen, if you care about UVA, that a really, really great student leader this year led a constitutional convention to do something, I think, really powerful with the honor system. Gathered a bunch of students together. I don't know, a huge percentage of the student body voted in the eventual referendum. It was just really great. People take it seriously. You know, it doesn't work perfectly, but people take it seriously. Students do, and we take it seriously too. So students who apply are on their honor to do their own work. I think we haven't figured out yet what the definition of own work is going to mean. A year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And that's not to say that we're not working on it, it's just that I don't know yet. Do you have any advice? What should we do? Handwritten, yeah, I think that's a good idea. We've thought about that, honestly. We've thought about a variety of things to kind of help people do what they, in their heart of hearts, want to do, rather what they might, in a weak moment, do instead. I think the great thing, actually, about ChatGPT, just for admission officers and for instruction, is it really causes us to think of what we're doing. Like, why do we ask questions in the first place? What do we want students to get out of that? What do we want to get out of it? And, you know, I think as we work into this and we have some experience with it, the shape of admission will change, and it'll change for the better because we'll be clear about what we're doing and why, rather than just doing what we've been doing since time immemorial. Yes, ma'am.
I think I'm correct. The Common App questions are staying the same with the right?
The Common App has one big prompt that students respond to in their Common App essay, in their personal essay. I don't think those questions have been announced yet for the coming year, although I may be wrong and have not paid attention to it. They change a little bit year by year. They're staying the same.
Do you think this year, I was wondering, because
Yeah, it's a really great point. So for sure, yeah, and you know, all the essays that students write, they live for us as data. You know, so we have a school of data science at UVA, and people are pretty good at paying attention to data. And in fact, I'm meeting with the dean of the School of Data Science on Monday to talk about some things related to essays. So yeah, I think that's a really great suggestion. Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. So when we read essays and when we say, gosh, we really felt like we got to know the student, what is it really? So a couple things just quickly. I know I keep saying that. You know, essays don't live on their own. They're part of a whole file. And so one of the things that matters for any individual essay is how it fits into the whole. You can have a beautifully written essay, an essay that sounds like the most good-hearted, genius, wonderful student wrote it, and if it doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything else that's in the application, then it doesn't exactly set a little alarm bell off in anybody's head, but it doesn't quite land in the way that a student might hope. And that's a challenge with ChatGPT. You can get sort of an archetypal essay, but we're not looking for archetypes, we're looking for people. And there are other clues in the application as to who the person is. Not perfect clues, again, we're seeing through a glass darkly, but there are other clues that help us piece together a student out of all those little parts. So when the application holds together, when an essay is within an application that is holding together, that is cohering, that helps. The other thing, honestly, is when the application does sound like, or an essay does sound like it was written by a person, you know, and preferably a 17-year-old person than a 61-year-old person. And I think it is, and I'm really glad you asked the question, and I know this wouldn't apply to anyone in this room, but I've seen a couple of really sad cases where parents were too involved in their children's essays, and the essays that came out were beautiful essays that sound as though were written by 55-year-old people. And those are not the people we're looking for, I'm sorry. Now, we do have a couple of 55-year-old first-year students in the class. There were people who wandered around and came to us late in life. We're pleased to have them. Adds a different perspective. We were talking about that earlier. But most students who are graduating from VES are not 55-year-old people. And so it's helpful for them to sound as though the young people they are rather than the other person they might think they need to be. And this goes back to the other person someone else thinks they might need to be. And this goes back to what I was trying to say earlier, just really trying to encourage students to have the courage to be themselves. And listen, I know that's a lot to ask. It feels like there's a lot on the line. But again, that's what gives the student the greatest chance of sounding like a person. To let us hear a voice that came from a person rather than a program. A voice that was the product of one person, not the product of a committee of people. And that in combination with an application's holding together, those are the things that make people sit up a little bit. Yes, Amy.
Probably more of a comment. Me and I are just so grateful you are serving that on literally on the pedestal for us all, and we appreciate it. And you affirmed a lot of, you know, when we're meeting with juniors this year, and as we've just gone through our first, you know, couple of months of meeting with juniors, the theme that Mimi, Coach Porter, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately, he couldn't be here with us, but our theme for this junior year is authenticity. And so we talked a lot to the junior class about ChatGPT, but really listening, colleges really listening to the kids' voice. And the voices really, it's hard for ChatGPT to get that. It's hard for a parent to tweak it. It really needs to come from within the student. And so we're just really appreciative that that's really what, listening to colleges and listening to you, that's really what you're looking for.
Well, Amy, thank you, and it's reassuring to me to be on your page. I mean, I promise you that. And I'm sorry, thank you also for mentioning Coach Porter. I forgot to mention him earlier, but I appreciate him as well. And again, listen, I know it's hard. It's hard to be yourself. It's hard for anybody to be yourself. I mean, it feels like there's so much riding on this. You know, and students have tried so hard, and they don't want to let you down. You know, our children don't want to let us down. They don't want to let their peers down. You all know better than I do the mess that is social media and people comparing themselves to one another. I mean, it's a terrible situation we've left young people in. And I know I am naive to think that looking authentically for a school, having the courage to stand on who you are, trusting that the result is going to be one that you'll not only live with, but that you'll thrive with. It's naive of me to think that the process of applying to school can help us rehabilitate ourselves in a way, but I sure hope it's true. And I think it's at least worth trying. You know, students will feel better, in my experience, students feel better if they rise or fall based on who they are and who they want to be, instead of who someone else has told them they need to be. And anything that people like yours truly, anything that I can ever do to underscore that message with your sons and daughters, that they're worthy of a school that will be worth their time and their loyalty, that they're worthy of love, not just the love of their parents, and not just the love of their classmates, and not just the love of their faculty, but the love of the likes of me. If there's anything that I or any of us at UVA can ever do to help you carry that message to your students in a way that they will feel in their bones to be true, I really hope you will call on me and let me try to do something good for you and your young people. It would be a privilege, I promise you. And again, if I have said or done anything today, that's not the right way to put it, for the things that I have done and said today that were dumb or hurtful to you, I do hope you'll forgive me. And I will look forward to trying to repair that damage as well when the time is right. And in the meantime, Mimi, Amy, Garth, Henry, all of you all, thank you so much for giving me the chance to be with you today.